Take your Bibles, please, and turn to the book of Nehemiah. We appreciate that special that magnifies our God, our great God. Nehemiah chapter number 2. This morning, we talked to you about how to discover God's will. But finding the right path is only part of the challenge, is it not? It is staying on the path that becomes the challenge. It's always one thing to start going down the right road, but continuing down the right road is the challenge. The reason why it's a challenge is because there are so many obstacles. There are certainly obstacles within us. The Bible tells us our heart is wicked and deceitful, and we have a selfish disposition from Romans chapter 3, verses 10 through 23, that does not go away when we get saved. So we certainly have to be careful with that. But there are obstacles in the world around us, okay? And so that we're going to talk about that. Before we get started in the book of Nehemiah, I want to put Nehemiah in a bit of historical context for you. So I just have let's go back, okay? There you go. Okay, I'm just going to do this part, Brother Jimmy. This is a new clicker, so we'll see if it actually, how this works. Okay, sounds good. Okay, so what you have, this is a picture I got off in, and just a summary of what happened. You had the southern kingdom. Israel's already gone off into captivity, the northern kingdom. The southern kingdom went off in basically three exoduses, as it were. And during this period of time when they were going over to Babylon, being brought into captivity, you had Jeremiah and Ezekiel, and these three different times where the nations, people were brought from Israel, or Judah rather, to Babylon, okay? Now coming back, there were three waves coming back. You had Zerubbabel in 536, and Ezra in 458, and of course Nehemiah in 444. And you know those dates go downwards as you go further along because those are BC, before Christ. So now, what we're talking about tonight is Nehemiah. Nehemiah came back to build the walls, okay? Zerubbabel built the temple, Ezra to reestablish the worship, and then Nehemiah is here to build the wall around Jerusalem, okay? Now, with that said, okay, we're going to talk this evening, and Brother Jimmy, you can have it from here, okay? We're going to talk this evening about the opposition that he encountered coming back to build the walls around the city. Just a summary. This is going to be going over Nehemiah at a very high altitude for the first few chapters as we see the obstacles he had to challenge our own hearts, to challenge ourselves, be ready for the predictable opposition. That's the outline. You have it in front of you, I believe. Number one, the predictable opposition. Now, if in fact you're going to stand for God and do God's will and follow his will for your life, and you find in Nehemiah that Nehemiah determined God's will in chapter 1, verse 1, down to chapter 2, verse number 11. During that time period, Nehemiah prays to God and hears the walls are torn down. And he knows, now Nehemiah has never been to Jerusalem. He was born in exile, and he grew up in exile, but he knew about Jerusalem, and he heard about the land, the city, and the walls being torn down and being defenseless. Because in Bible times, in Israel, if you did not have a walled city, it was undefendable. You were prey to anybody and everybody who wanted to come by. You didn't have walls around your city. And so it wasn't like in some areas of the world where you could build a particular city surrounded by rivers or mountaintops and cliffs and protected as well. It was just very difficult to protect any kind of peoples that are not inside a walled city. And so he was brokenhearted over that. And in chapter 1, he confesses the sin of his people. And then in chapter 2, God opens the door, because he's the cupbearer for the king, to request of the king permission to go back and build the walls, in which he got the permission, and then he started moving forward. And in 52 days, he's actually going to build the walls back up around the city. But in the process, there are a number of oppositions that come from local groups. Now, we're not going to major on who they are, but just a couple of guys and groups of people who are quite difficult. Sanballat, Tobiah, and Geshem, these people were opposing what he did. Now, what happens in chapter 2, you notice, if you would please, begin reading in verse number 17. And then said I unto them, ye see the distress, he's speaking to people here that at Jerusalem, that we are in, how Jerusalem lieth waste, and the gates whereof are burned, and the fire came, and let us build up the wall of Jerusalem, that we be no more a reproach. He is very concerned about the testimony of Jerusalem, God's city, but also, of course, of their safety. Then verse 18, then I told them of the hand of my God, which was good upon me, as also the king's word that he had spoken unto me. And they said, let us rise up and build. So they strengthened their hands for this good work. Now here we are in verse 18. Nehemiah has already gotten the call of God upon his life. God has made it possible for him to do this. And now comes the opposition in verse 19. The opposition begins actually in verse 19. I'm going to give you 5 words, or 6, actually 1, 2, 3, 6 words to write down. So let me have you write these words down, then we'll talk about them. There's 6 of them, okay? And they're going to appear on the screen. There's an A, B, C, D, and E, and an F. And here are the 6 of them. First of all, it's ridicule. Okay, you can write them down if you want to. Second is anger. Third is opposition, okay? Or disruption, rather, disruption. And then we have lies, okay? Okay, deception. They changed on me here, okay? And then we have, what's the last one? Okay, false teaching, okay? So we're going to talk about each of these. I changed the words on that, did not change them on here, so we'll do that, okay? Deception and disruption. Now, notice if you would please at chapter 2 and verse 19. And when Sanballat the Horonite and Tobiah the servant of the Ammonites and Geshem the Arabian, these are all different leaders in that particular area that, of course, were opposed to the idea of Jerusalem becoming the defensible city, heard it, and watch this, they laughed us to scorn and despised us and said, what is this thing that ye do? Ye will rebel against the king. Notice in verse 19, notice the sarcasm. The phrase laughed us to scorn is in fact one Hebrew word that means to mock and to ride, almost with a stammering sound, okay? And the idea of despise is to disdain them. So what's happening here, now watch this, is there's ridicule taking place. Now if you stand for God, if you attempt to do his will, you are going to experience ridicule. You are not going to be accepted by everybody. Is that not true? And people will ridicule what you do, and they will make fun of what you do, and they will disdain what you do. If you've ever noticed on many news channels or news shows, if a Bible-believing Christian is interviewed, you can sense the ridicule just coming forth towards the positions of righteousness and holiness and godliness. And so ridicule is something that we have to deal with. We have to understand. You know the old saying, sticks and stones will break my bones, but words will what? Is that true? No. I don't know who thought of that phrase. It must have been somebody who was deaf. I don't know. But because they could not read sign language or could not read. Because words are extremely painful. Okay? And you say, well, who cares what people think? Let me tell you something. Everybody cares what people think. If you think, well, I shouldn't care what people think, everybody has a care because we're impacted by it. But the second is anger. Look at chapter 4. In chapter 4, look at verse 1. That despising there, but now you notice anger here because now the work is moving forward and they're getting a bit angry about the whole thing. You see, the world doesn't mind as much what we think and what we do as long as we're not effective. If we don't mind sitting in our place, I remember when we built the building and we went to Nag's Head for the permit to build the building, they told us we had to have a really small little 10 by 10 sign out front, some kind of small postage stamp size sign. And I remember so much the person in charge of that, I know the person now, and they should have known better than that, but they said to me, well, we like our churches in Nag's Head to have small signs. I said, you do? I said, JK has a big sign. They're wrecking people's lives with all the alcohol. All these beer joints are up here having these big signs. Why can't we have a big sign? And so we had to press the point a bit, okay? Because they don't mind if you just stay in your place. Just stay in your place. But if you start getting out of the place, they're not going to be happy campers over the whole thing. Look at chapter 4, verse 1. And it came to pass when Sanballat heard that we built the wall, it wasn't done, but they were making really good progress, he was wroth and took great indignation and mocked the Jews. Now he's becoming very upset. He is, the idea of wrath there is the idea of a burning kind, the word wrath there is a burning kind of anger. It's simmering. He's getting madder by the moment, okay? Because the devil hates it when we do God's will. And we have to stop pretending that somehow we're going to fit in. We're not going to fit in. Now, we're not trying to be difficult. I mentioned this morning, the reason we kept having church this past spring was not because we were trying to be somehow difficult or weird. We were simply trying to do the right thing. And so, but when you do the right thing, the world gets angry, and it takes great indignation. The indignation means that they were trying to demoralize them. They were so passionate, angry. Think about how this works. If you ever noticed anybody interviewed on the news, and the interviewer says this, some talk show, are you saying that a person who doesn't accept Christ as their Savior is going to die and go to hell? And usually the person interviewing don't even believe in hell. They don't even believe the Bible. They usually don't believe in God, many of them, okay? So why are they so upset when we say that someone who not a believer is going to hell, a place they don't even believe exists, a God they don't even really exist, okay? Because they don't get upset if we don't believe in the Easter Bunny or the Tooth Fairy. Why is it? Because in their hearts of heart, they know there is a God. And the world gets angry at God's children for doing God's work. Look at verse 2. And he spake before his brethren and the army of the Samaritans and said, what do these feeble Jews? For they fortify themselves. Will they sacrifice? Will they make an end in our day? Will they revive the stones out of the heaps of the rubbish which are burnt? And Tobiah and the Ammonites was by him, and said, even that which they build, if a fox go up, it shall even break down their stone walls. He is certainly being, his anger is leading to ridicule. The third is a disruption, okay? Look at now what happens here, okay? Look at chapter 4 and look at verse 7. But it came to pass that when Sanballat and Tobiah and the Arabians and the Ammonites heard of the wall of Jerusalem made up, and the breach began to be stopped up. Now watch it. They conspired, all of them together, to come and to fight against Jerusalem and to hinder it. They're simply to disrupt it. They're trying to come in and disrupt the cause of God, okay? And that's certainly the desire of the devil. I know you probably know this, but 2 of the 9 Supreme Court justices in our country believe that a school like Pensacola Christian School or Bob Jones University or Ambassador should be forced to hire morally perverse people who don't believe in God. They're on the records of saying that Christian schools should have to hire people of all kinds of gender descriptions and affiliation, okay? Just a side note, that's the danger of the whole court packing concern, because you get 6 more justices who believe the same kind of nonsense, and there goes any religious freedom in our country, okay? So the enemy is not going to stand still. I wish I could tell you that the world is happy when we help keep people out of hell, but they're not. And the opposition comes and the attempt to disrupt, okay? And then you have disruption coming up, okay? Deception, rather. Look at chapter 6. Now, the work is continuing. In chapter 5, Nehemiah deals with a problem within God's people. But chapter 6, now it came to pass when Sanballat and Tobiah and the Geshem, the Arabian, and the rest of our enemies heard that I had built the wall and that there was no breach therein, so the wall is making tremendous progress. Verse 2, that Sanballat and Geshem sent unto me, saying, come, let us meet together in some of the villages in the plain of Ono, but they thought to do me mischief. Now they're attempting now of deception. They're saying, come and let us talk together. Let us commune together. Of course, it was an ambush. I mean, Nehemiah wasn't born last night. He understood this. And yet there's an attempt to deceive, okay? Not only disrupt, but to deceive and to create an environment where they can hurt us. I remember a number of years ago, I was asked to attend a meeting at a Bible-believing fundamental church. And at that church, they were talking about the issue of a moral issue. But they had there people of all different stripes and beliefs that were pagan in their beliefs. They were Christian in name, but pagan in their beliefs. And I just could not do that. I could not stay with that, okay? Because if I start accommodating, if I start assigning to cultic faiths the Christian title, okay, or affirmation, I'm going to confuse people, okay? And so here you have this attempt of deception, okay? Then you had, of course, the lies being told. Look at chapter 6 now, drop down to verse 5, okay? Then sent Sanballat his servants unto me in like manner the 5th time. So these requests that happen in verses 1 through 4 happen over and over again, but here comes the next one. With an open letter in his hand. Now, an open letter, you've seen, that's not uncommon today. Somebody will write an op-ed page or whatever, an open letter to President this, or an open letter to this person. And of course, his attempt is to say, I'm writing to this person, everybody know what I'm saying, okay? Now, this was a particular two things. First of all, it was a great offense to Nehemiah because he was a person of stature in that culture. And he should have been respected and not sent an open letter. And of course, the purpose of the open letter was to bring fear and disunity and confusion among God's people. Look at verse 6. Wherein was written, it is reported among the heathens, and Geshem saith it, that thou and the Jews think to rebel, for which cause thou built the wall, that thou mayest be their king, according to those words. So they're lying. That's what they do. That's what the world does. The world lies, and it says things that are not true, okay? And you have to be careful about something when it comes to opposition, because opposition will lie about you and lie to you. But what you can't do is allow them to define terms that are not biblically and truthfully accurate. For example, when you're told that you are prejudiced against somebody because of some sin issue in their life, okay, and they tell you that you're treating that person like 50 years ago, 100 years ago, blacks were treated in our country, that's a strong selling point, unfortunately, to non-thinking people, okay? But if you're a thinking person, you cannot allow people to use phrases and make statements and you buy into their lies. So when somebody talks to me, for example, about the issue of freedom of choice, okay, and I just simply respond by saying there's not freedom of choice. The father has no choice. The grandmother and grandfather have no choice. The baby has no choice. It's not no freedom of choice. It's a mischaracterization of what the issue is. The issue is life, okay? Now, why do you know that? Because nobody in their right mind would think that traveling the distance that it takes to travel through a birth canal somehow imparts life. The process of going through a birth canal does not impart life. And so they bring lies to the table, okay? And religious people buy into it, okay? But we have to expect it in not being controlled by the lies of other people, okay? Then later on in the chapter, you have the last of it, which is false teaching. What happens now, later on, as you look at the chapter, okay? After that whole report comes down, in verses 5 down to verse 9. Then look at verse 10, I believe it is, okay? And afterwards, I came into the house of Shimei, the son of Delaliah, the son of Mahakabel, which was shut up. And he said, let us meet together in the house of God, wherein the temple, and let us shut the doors of the temple, for they will come to slay thee, yea, that in the night will they come to slay thee. And I said, should such a man as I flee? Now, what's happening here is evidently this is character here on the scene that has a name that's used elsewhere by other people, and he is staying in the temple with some sense of piety or whatever. And he's saying to Nehemiah, come and hide yourself. This is particularly supposed to be a person of God, maybe a prophet of God or a speaker for God, coming to Nehemiah and giving him false advice. Okay? Listen to me. The devil will use the scripture and use religious people to sidetrack you from the call of God upon your life. It happens, okay? Now the question is, what do I do in light of all of this? What do I do in light of all this? And that's point number 2, some practical responses. And I think there are 5 of them I've got to make sure I keep in mind. I'm going to give you the words, and then we're going to talk about them just for a moment, and we'll land the plane. Okay, and here are the 5 words. First of all, clarity. Okay? Second, prayer. Third, prevention. Okay? Fourth, stubbornness. Stubbornness can be a good thing. And then letter E, confrontation. What Nehemiah does here in all of these things, he actually responds to it. Now, as a Christian, I don't have to respond to everything, but I have to respond to some things. Now, I have to respond to the forces at play that try to push me away from God's will for my life. Now, notice the idea of clarity. Look at chapter 2, if you would, and look at verse 20. After Sanballat comes and he makes his ridiculed comments, look at verse 20. Then answered I them and said unto them, the God of heaven, he will prosper us. Therefore we his servants will arise and build. But ye have no portion, nor right, nor memorial in Jerusalem. With clarity, he's doing a number of things. He's saying, this is God, this is the call of God upon my life, and God will make his will be accomplished in my life. What does the Bible say in the book of James? If the Lord wills, we shall live and do this and that, this or that. So I know with clarity, God is going to allow me to do his will. Now, what is his will? I don't always know what his will is, okay? Or where his will is going to lead, okay? When we began the church 21 years ago, we had I remember, so clearly, how convinced we were that God was going to cause us to buy some property 5 miles north or south of the Wright Memorial Bridge. That was one of our mantras when we first started the church. And we had no idea what we were talking about, but we had a plan. And we didn't wind up in Dare County by y'all were so smart to build the church in Dare County, because had you built it 1 foot on the other side of the Wright Memorial Bridge, that would have been a completely different kind of church. And if you know the area, you know that's true, as far as who would come and who you could draw from and everything. And we had no idea about any of that. You know how we winded up in Dare County? Because the place we were meeting in Currituck County closed down. You said, well, you mean y'all didn't give that some forethought to have a 5-year plan? We didn't have any kind of plan, okay? And so God in his sovereignty, and we'll talk about some of that with the providence of God, orchestrated that. Okay? So we don't always know where God's going to lead. So we have to be careful that we don't speak for God when God hasn't spoken to us. But here he knew that this was God's will for his life, so he said, God's going to do this. And he said, not only clear in what I'm going to do, but I'm clear in who can't do it with me. Okay? We have these questionnaires going out. Okay? And we're just clear. If you're going to have a position of leadership in our church, then there has to be a level of faithfulness in your life. So I want to be a deacon, or I want to be a Sunday school teacher. I want to be on the financial team. Well, are you tithing? Are you being faithful in your attendance? Remember, years ago, here in Dr. David Jeremiah, maybe anybody ever heard of Dr. David Jeremiah? Okay, he said when the church he pastors there in California, when he came as pastor, he had nothing to do with it. It was already set before he came there. But on his key leadership, before they asked him to do anything, the first thing they checked was the giving records. You say, well, that's private stuff. Well, not that church here. It is private, but it's, and you say, well, now what we don't do that. What we tell people is, if you don't have enough character to tithe, then don't come to the financial team meeting. Right? I mean, don't handle the money if you're not tithing. Don't handle other people's money if you're stealing from God, because you're a thief. And if you're a thief and not tithing, then don't come to the financial team. And don't try to deke on Monday if you're not at church on Sunday night. I'm not talking about being sick or you can't come, but you don't come. Talking about thing, And so there's a level of expectation there. You need to be clear. And so what helped Nehemiah at the very beginning of the opposition was he was clear. Okay. And then second, he prayed. Look at chapter 4 and look at verse 4. After the attack that comes in this anger, look at verse 4. He says in chapter 4, verse 4, "Hear, O our God, for we are despised, and turn the reproach upon their own head and give them for a prey in the land of captivity." In other words, Lord, you take care of this. Down in chapter, I think verse 9 does it again, does he not? "Nevertheless, we made our prayer unto God and set the watch." So he's a man of prayer. When I'm battling opposition to God's will, I must be a person of prayer. Okay? But thirdly, there's an idea of prevention. An ounce of prevention maybe is worth a pound of cure. You've heard that before. But look at chapter 4 and look at verse 9. Look how he responds here. He says, "Nevertheless, we made our prayer to God." Now look back at verse 8. This is the attempt here in verse 8 to stop the work by disrupting it, by attacking it. So in verse 9, "Nevertheless, we made our prayer unto God, and" what? "Set a watch against them day and night because of them." Now, he is going to begin in verse 9, all the way down to verse 23. He's basically going to set up a system of prevention to prevent defeat. Now, what's he going to do? Well, he's going to set people in watch, and he's going to have people guarding, and those who are working and have the tools of defending themselves at hand, the swords and so forth, and everything else. And so he's making a very practical plan so they can work the work and also protect the workers at the same time. He is practically preventing the devil from being able to win the battle. Okay? So what does that mean for you and I? It means I've got to not only do I need to be clear on what God's called me to do and pray about it, but I've got to take steps to make the will of God possible in my life. Okay? That's why I recommend that we take wise steps in making the will of God protected and prioritized in our life in a way that makes sin difficult. That's one of the reasons a number of us I know have accountability process, things built into our life. For example, in our household, there would be no thought of me having any account or anything that Karen could not access freely and easily. Not have that anything, but I have a Facebook account. If she wants to read it, fine by me. We all have it together. But the point is, there needs to be an openness. You need to be accountable. Okay. You need to be able to allow people to prevent things from going the wrong direction, okay? So you have to ask yourself the question, okay? What is it that causes you to, when is it that you tend to get off track concerning God's will for your life? What is the condition? What is the situation? Where's the time? And where's the place, okay? And know yourself so you can take the preventive actions to prevent it from happening, okay? And then letter D, there's a stubbornness here, okay? A sense of a stubborn will. Look at chapter 6 and verse 3. After being asked to come out and talk, you get sidetracked. Look at verse 3, one of the most famous verses of the book of Nehemiah, verse 3. "And I sent messages unto them and said, I am doing a great work, so I cannot come down. Why should the work cease whilst I leave it and come down to you?" He understands this is a kind of stubbornnness that is rooted in a value system, okay? I cannot stop what God's called me to do to be sidetracked in a different direction, okay? I will say this, as a pastor and as a church, we are often asked as a church, and I'm often asked as a pastor, to get involved in a lot of things that many of them are not bad things. They're not bad things, not wrong things necessarily, but they're not things that keep the main thing the main thing, okay? I've got to be so careful about that. We had a wonderful meeting, like I said, a deacons meeting on Wednesday night, and we didn't use those phrases, but the idea was laid out, okay? One of the challenges we had with a remote learning ministry the first 9 weeks was it was different than we had anticipated, at least I had anticipated. There were other people amongst us who anticipated it, but I didn't anticipate it. I really didn't. But there was just no available oxygen for the first 5 weeks of remote learning for me personally. And it affected what I could do as far as who I could see. We're going on vacation this next week for 5 days. When I get back, I'm looking forward to getting back to my regular scheduling programming, okay? Now, things do happen, okay? But it's one thing to fall into it, and then you have to adjust it, and which we've done. But in your own life, you've got to make sure that you guard yourself. You don't allow yourself to get sucked into things that maybe aren't wrong things, but things that will sidetrack you. For example, there's nothing wrong. Is there anything wrong with taking a break and talking to somebody? No. But in this case, it would have been wrong for him because it would have hurt the work of God. Okay? So we have to make sure that we stubbornly hold on to, okay, the call of God in our life and resist the pulls to compromise our focus so that we will not be able to do his will. And then finally, at times there has to be the confrontation. Okay? Look at verse 8. Then I sent unto him, saying, there are no such things done as thou sayest. Remember, they had accused him of wanting to be king. He says, that didn't happen that way. Nothing like that was said. And he goes on all the way down to verse 14, and he confronts the lies, okay? And there are times when you have opposition where you have to confront it. Remember, years ago in my first I've had 2 pastorates, and so one for 19 years and one for 21 years. And the first pastorate I had a person I had the joy of leading to Christ. And he was a good man, but he just cocked an attitude. Something happens. And it happens occasionally. He breaks your heart when it does. He got something, just something went awry. I'm not talking about he went mentally crazy, but spiritually he went crazy, okay? And he became very foolish in the things he was saying. And at the time, we built a building. We had built a building there in Raleigh, and none of us on the building team had much experience with it, so we forgot the budget for pews. Now, we built a big, not a big, it was a 6,000 square foot building, whatever it was. We had a nice auditorium, but when we got it all built, we said, what are we going to do for pews? We're out of money. And we had no pews. And so we brought the pews from the old building, which was great, because we moved around Christmas time, and the carpet was red, and the pews in the old church were green. So for the month of December, it worked out quite well. And so it was color coded. Oh, it's wonderful. Look, they got green and green and green. It was such a nice Christmas day. But come January, it was quite unfitting. And the pews only went like 2/3 of the way back, so it was what it was, okay? So we're going to have a vote to replace them. And this is when chairs was a novel idea. And if we would have the vote today, I'd be all for chairs. But that's when chairs were like a novel idea back before electricity, all years. And so he comes to me and says, if we vote to do this, whatever it was, I forget what it was, I'm going to leave the church. And I will tell you, threatening me has never been a good move, okay? And I said, well, have a nice trip, okay? In fact, if you want to, leave before the vote, okay? And we got out in the front, and we were talking together, and we were not going to hit anybody or anything, but it just went stupider to stupider. It went from stupid to stupid. And so finally I said, let's just stop this, because right here, there are 2 fools talking. I'm a fool for talking to you because you are a fool. And now, I said it nicely, as nice as you can when you say to somebody, but it was true. He was speaking foolishness, okay? And sometimes you have to confront it, okay? Now, there's no message in that for you, for anybody here or anybody in our church family. I'm just saying that sometimes you have to confront it, okay? And so when you have opposition, there are times you just clearly state your position, times you pray, times you take preventative action. Sometimes you are stubbornly just digging your heels. But other times you have to make a confrontational expression, okay? But the goal here is to finish the call of God upon your life. Now, here's the question. When do you know the call of God is finished, God's done with your life? This is when you stop breathing. So you can always test this. Okay, this is a foolproof message to test. Hold your hand on your chest and take in air. If you feel movement, then God isn't done with you yet. Okay? He has a will for you. He is certainly capable to have you stop breathing. You know, he's not like some pastors taught me, I don't know, should I move, should I not move? I said, look, I can guarantee you, if God wants you to move you, he can move you. I'm an example of that. Okay, you go on vacation, they fire you, you know. That God has no problem moving you if he wants to move you, okay? All right, so the point is that we want to finish the task that God has for us, and let's be faithful to it.